So while all of us were preparing for vacation, something really important happened, and it's going to be a lot of legal jargon and your eyes are going to glaze over. But this is one of the most important stories, I think, of the year. And this story here is just going to set the foundation for what we'll probably be talking about for years to come. Okay, so this was the overturning of the Chevron doctrine, or deference as it's known. And this regulation, this will touch almost every facet of American life. And what it's really going to do is kind of, so I'm going to give a little bit of history. Again, bear with me. I'm going to take some time to go through it, go through the areas that it impacts. It's going to be a little boring, but I'm also going to give you a real life example from my experience during the GFC with the CFPB. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about is exactly what was this. So essentially this case, it goes back 40 years. This was all about what happens when there is a rule that is unclear, from a regulatory body. Well, basically what the Chevron deference is it said, well, the actual agency could decide or would have more of the weight in the decision than the court system, because they were the ones with the expertise. Now, for those of you that taking us way back to our elementary school or junior high lessons on, why the U.S. is so, different from many countries, is that we have, different branches of government so that we can make sure. What's the song, guys? Do you remember, Travis or Jack, from Schoolhouse Rocks? Take a bill on Capitol Hill. And anyway, okay, sorry, that's okay. Essentially,
how a bill becomes a law. I remember that.
Yeah, how a bill becomes a law, and then
there's
just
a shorter version of that via executive order. Done.
And just the idea that you have independent branches of government, and it's checks and balances. And they talked, always talking about checks and balances. Well, 40 years ago in 1984, essentially what this did is make the administrative state way more powerful. And in my opinion, and again, I'm not a congressional scholar, I'm not a legal scholar, so, I can't say absolutely on some of these things, but I'll say, but in my opinion, this gave a lot of weight to the administrative state. Now, I want to be clear that the lawsuit that was brought against this was paid for by some, like a conservative backed group, Koch. And so there's definitely a certain political camp that is for overturning this doctrine. And so whether or not you thought there was administrative overreach before, the idea is now that the judiciary is going to have to be the final word on interpreting these federal statutes. And I'm going to give you an example for myself that will put this into context, because I very personally have experienced this. So back during Dodd-Frank, or after the GFC, and you had Dodd-Frank and you had the CFPB, or the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, they essentially had all kinds of powers over my life as someone in the mortgage industry. And so I'm just going to quickly give you an example that if you were being accused of doing something incorrectly as an officer of a mortgage company, they could take you into a proceeding without legal representation. And they could ban you from the industry for life. They could give you civil money penalties, and you absolutely had no recourse. And so that kind of power, I don't think, is a good idea. And it was personally very scary for me, because at the time I was overseeing one of the most important sort of results from the CFPB rules, which was on third party organizations, because that's something that happened during the mortgage crisis, is that the companies were kind of accused of giving way too much of their power to these third party, like think about CoreLogic, one of Travis's favorite, or they were actually doing all the things, these third parties were doing the things that the companies themselves should do. And so a whole bunch of acronyms, but the OCC, all these rules came out from the CFPB about how you were supposed to do third party oversight. And this was one of the positions that could have been subject to this banning from the industry, subject to this trial without representation. And so it was a very terrifying time in the mortgage industry. So I want to just go through some of the comments from the justices to give you kind of, a good representation of the pro and the cons. And again, I know this is dry, but think about Justice Roberts. The first thing he said is this is going to allow agencies to change course even when Congress is giving them no power to do so. Okay. So that's what the Chevron doctrine did. It allowed all these agencies to think about this, to just this, we'll talk about it later. The very contentious student loan forgiveness is one of these topics, but essentially as our government has failed to enact any sort of, legislation productively in some time, this doctrine made it possible for the administrative state to take actions it wouldn't have ordinarily been able to do so. Okay, Justice Thomas said, the Chevron doctrine, he argued, requires judges to give up their constitutional power to exercise their independent judgment and allows the executive branch to exercise powers not given to it. So on this slide, you're kind of talking about how these judges are, thinking about this previous Chevron doctrine that was overturned. And I can never say his name, but all today's decision means is that going forward, federal courts will do exactly as this court has since 2016, exactly as it did before the mid-1980s, and exactly as it had done since the founding, resolve cases and controversies without any systemic bias in the government's favor. And then I'm going to read this Kagan dissent comment, and then I want to stop at that point and give you and Jack Travis some time to comment, and then we'll start talking about the specific areas this is going to impact. So Kagan was the dissent, and she says, Congress often enacts regulatory laws that contain ambiguities and gaps, she observed, which agencies must then interpret. The question, as she framed it, is who decides which of the possible readings of those laws should prevail? For 40 years, she stressed, the answer to that question has generally been the agencies, with good reason, she says. Agencies are more likely to have the technical and scientific expertise to make such decisions. And so I think, guys, just to sum this up, essentially those who sort of were for overturning the Chevron doctrine believed that the Chevron doctrine really kind of took away powers from the judiciary and gave them to the administrative state. And so, and in doing so, the checks and balances got off balance. And so I just want to stop at that point before we go into the particulars of what this could mean, which is, I think, the most important thing. But Jack and Travis, just your initial reactions to this.
Well,
okay.
I can tell you,
go ahead, Jack.
if you don't mind, Travis, I have lived this experience because as we discussed earlier, I was a commercial fisherman, and we did have National Marine Fisheries observers came out on the boat with us every couple of trips, and we had to pay them. We had to pay their salaries. We had to feed them on the boat. It was an extra guy was stinking up and snoring in the bunk room. Commercial fishing boat is a dangerous environment. There's another guy wandering around on the deck when there's metal swinging around. I mean, there's a lot that could go wrong there, and we had to pay for that. We had no choice. That came right out of my paycheck, and I didn't have a say in it. So, I've been on the wrong end of this decision before. That thing Kagan is saying about experts, I mean, this is a Supreme Court judge. What? Oh, experts are not capable of overstepping their legal boundaries? Experts are not capable of trampling a man's rights? We need to just step aside and let this all go because experts? Where the hell is that in the Constitution? How do these people make it to the bench in the first place, I wonder? All this does is this reins in the power of the executive branch, which needs to be reined in because Congress doesn't do a dang thing. And for the last 40 years, the judiciary hasn't done a dang thing to rein in the executive branch. This restores the balance the founders intended. So I am just 100% rock and roll in favor of this decision. This is a libertarian's dream come true, and I'll just cut it off there.
Yeah. So before you go, Travis, I would just like to say that, I mean, we often, 40 years ago, when this thing was first decided, nobody realized the ramifications of it. I mean, it was thought of as not a very important decision. And then now it is one of the most widely, cited cases, which tells you that we swung to the other side. And so as always, I'm sure there are going to be unintended consequences of this decision, but I'm also a fan of transparency, a fan of judges doing their job in the judiciary and doing that job of interpretation. It is not, to say that it's just the expertise. Well, that sounds a lot like Fed speak, in my opinion. But Travis, to you.
I mean, so to me, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Melody, but it sounds like the whole Chevron doctrine, and this is hard for me to wrap my head around that this actually exists, but it's giving a type of judicial superpower to third parties. To me, that seems un-American. To me, it seems like someone shady got into office to allow this type of crap. And maybe that's why they're so easily passing bills and everyone is rushing to print money without properly regulating it. So hopefully, what I'm hearing so far is once this is removed, hopefully it will remove more of the massive loopholes, right? Hopefully it will remove more of the greed, corruption, the fraud, and it will force agencies to do the right thing or stop, right? Instead of violating the Constitution of the United States of America. It seems like this law was extremely lazy and unresponsible, and it seems like them overturning it is a massive win for America. So I'm excited. I'm wondering when they're going to start enforcing this and when it's going to roll out.
Yeah, so it's already gotten, there's been a lot of challenges already. One of, I think the big debates is, will there be, legal challenges to prior cases? And I think that what they're trying to say, this is really go for it, but you are going to have challenges. And so I think that what I'd like to do is just talk about some of the areas where this matters. And for those of you at home saying, this doesn't make any sense, you're about to see that this impacts every aspect of your life, honestly. And so I just wanted to give you two little reactions from, opposing sides, one that was for, one that was against. So one of the lawyers who argued the case on behalf of one of the fishing companies, which again, just like Jack was saying, this is exactly what this initial case was about, is the example that Jack gave. But these were funded not by those fishing entities. I just want everyone to understand that as well, because it's important about who and why. But basically said, by ending Chevron deference, the court has taken a major step to preserve the separation of powers and shut down unlawful agency overreach. Going forward, judges will be charged with interpreting the law faithfully, impartially, and independently without deference to the government. This is a win for individual liberty and the Constitution. So very much, kind of saying what Jack said as well. Kim Meyer, she's the litigation director from the Southern Environmental Law Center, decried the ruling in a statement. The Supreme Court today says individual judges around the country should decide the best reading of a statute. I'm sorry, I couldn't keep myself from laughing. That is a recipe for chaos, as hundreds of federal judges who lack the expertise of agency personnel are certain to reach inconsistent results on the meaning of federal laws as applies to complex technical issues. Okay, guys, that's what judges do. I mean, I hate to, I really am trying not to be biased here, but when you think about the way that our government was set up, this is exactly what they're supposed to do. And if they are not qualified, then they need to move on along, in my opinion.
This Kim Meyer lady, can I just take a crack at her?
Yeah, right? You go for it, Jack.
Yeah, this Kim Meyer lady, oh my God, judges lack the federal expertise, they can't. Now the judges are going to interpret the laws. That is exactly what the country was founded on. The legislature makes the laws, the executive branch carries them out, and the judicial determines if they are constitutional or fair. That is how this country was built. All right. So if you're sitting there saying unelected bureaucrats no longer have the ability to manufacture criminals via changing their interpretation of existing law, like that's a bad thing. Well, look at the group that she's working for, the Southern Environmental Law Center. These are the kind of people who wander onto your property and take a picture and say, oh, there's a puddle when it rains. That makes your land wetlands, and now you can't build a house on it. And somebody who saved their whole life to buy that property is now ruined. Well, yeah, now a judge gets a say in that. And that's not a terrible thing, right, unless you're Kim Meyer and you get off on having the power to do that to people. So
spicy,
again,
very
this
spicy.
is exactly the way the country was meant to be run. and the people who have all the power being stripped from them now don't like it, well, that's too bad. Cry me a river. Just as long as it doesn't run through my property and make it wetland.
No, it's a wetland.
Yeah.
Exactly. And as we go through these examples, you're going to see so many instances of this that are just kind of creepy, guys, to be honest. And so, I talked about the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. This is a huge agency that came about after the GFC, and they did all kinds of crazy things. Like, the things that I just described to you, that idea that someone could go to a hearing and not have legal representation, to me, that is completely contradictory to what our country was founded on. And it's just insane. But some things that the CFPB has done recently is they just issued a rule that said buy now, pay later are credit card loans. Okay. I mean, these are the kinds of things that are happening without Congress getting involved. And so I just think that, we have to go back to those checks and balances. But we're going to go through a couple more places. This is another big one. And I think the reason why I said after Jack's last comment from the other segment wasn't a good segue is that a lot of the actions being taken by the Fed, a lot of the actions being taken by the OCC, the FDIC, just you can put whatever acronym you want to up there. They've done it by referring to the Chevron doctrine, saying our deference that they were the experts, and therefore they should have the final say. But with this coming down in this way, that will be challenged. And so this has the potential to impact the ability to do future bailouts. And this is really important. And not a lot of people are talking about it. And we're going to talk about the Washington Post story that gave 8 ways that this was going to be impactful. And the fact that they didn't mention that or spend a little bit of time only on the financial aspects, guys, and instead they focus on the political aspects of transgender rights, student loans, things like that. In reality, this could be a sea change in what response could happen in the next financial crisis. And so the SEC, kind of specifically, this is one where the SEC could they could do the same thing that I was just talking about, the CFPB, and they could, basically take you to one of these administrative proceedings without actually giving you a jury trial. And so now that is coming into question. And some others, the banking industry, something we talk a lot about, Basel III. So think about this. We've heard a lot about these new capital requirements. We've talked about them on this show and how the banks are going full court press to get out from under those capital requirements. In fact, Chase just said, hey, we're going to start charging you to hold your checking account because we're going to need to do that to pay for these. Okay, guys, no, but whatever. But Basel III. So all of this, these things could come under criticism precisely because this Chevron case has been overturned. And so it's going to impact so much of what we discuss here. And like I said, I'm not a legal scholar, but I just want to lay the groundwork because I think we're going to be talking about this for the next several years. Some other ones, anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing, national bank corporate powers. And these are essentially the corporate powers of national banks are enumerated in this statute they mention here. And since national banks are not limited to the specific enumerated powers, the court relied on Chevron and deferred to the OCC's reasonable interpretation, reaching its decision. Okay, I just talked about the OCC because back during the GFC, and I'm so sorry, we're going to have to put a dictionary, guys. We're going to have to do the Doomers News Network dictionary where we just explain what all these acronyms are. But the OCC, or the Office of the Comptroller, they came out with all these rules on third-party oversight, and those were basically law to the banks. The Fed came out with their consent orders to the mortgage companies. This doctrine is how they could do all of those things without getting congressional assistance. Digital assets. Okay, so whether cryptocurrency or other digital assets are investment contracts under the Securities Act of 1933 and therefore subject to SEC jurisdiction is another example of a possible challenge in a post-Chevron world. Can you imagine? I mean, this is a big deal, right? So then net neutrality. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but this is where essentially internet service providers, there's just been a recent rule that was issued by the FCC that said that these internet providers could not throttle content based on being paid to do so. So this is obviously, you can imagine there are a lot of people unhappy about that. Industry giants have sued over the rules, which they felt are broadening the FCC oversight of those firms. So already challenges are happening. This was just passed last week, guys. So this is hugely disruptive. Intellectual property rights. This is impacting a big Google case about Sonos the speakers. But just know that essentially there's a lot of vested interest in this case as to whether Google violated these patent rights, and so they've recently just now asked the U.S. Court of Appeals to take another look based on throwing out the Chevron deference. So this is hitting the tech sector. This is hitting the financial sector. I mean, this is massive news, and it's just hard to understand. Workers' rights. Recent Labor Department rule on, the kind of overtime. This is now also being challenged in Texas. And so workers' rights, this is going to impact probably, the Labor Department's ability to establish these different, this one act they're talking about, the 2022 Pregnancy Workers Fairness Act, that also, it provides new pregnancy and childbirth related accommodations, one of which is about providing reasonable accommodation for abortion. So, and then student loan forgiveness. This was so if you go to the Washington Post article and you read it, I changed the order. If you read it, the very first thing they talk about are these political things that are going to hot button issues like student loan forgiveness. And so, we've got two different ways that the Biden administration has been trying to do an in run. And those are both being challenged right now. There are AGs in 18 states that have sued to stop the Saving on a Valuable Education program. And then you've got these attorneys for career colleges and schools of Texas trying to block this one rule about, forgiving loan amounts based on whether they thought the school was a bad actor. And so let me see, I think, and then protections for transgender students. This comes in. And before you say, this is just a Biden thing, this was actually a Trump thing before it was a Biden thing. And there's not a lot of differences, but it's how they defined sex in Title IX, which has been around for a very long time. And so this is also going to be challenged. And then lab developed medical tests. A lot of academic hospitals develop their own tests for things like cancer and Alzheimer's. What this new rule was trying to do, the FDA was trying to do, is try to say those tests are medical devices, and they should have delegation over that or oversight. So this is also going to be challenged. And so, that's you can take down the slides now, Travis. But so, guys, all across the country right now, there are lawsuits being launched, and this huge decision. And it's going to impact all of us. And honestly, it is going to change the conversation on bailouts. Absolutely. Because a lot of those administrative powers, if we had known what the Fed had done during the GFC with those, backdoor lines, swap lines, it's that type of thing. They cannot operate under the cover of darkness any longer by saying that they're the experts. And so I believe that this is going to make it more difficult for money printing in the future, honestly. So,
okay, I have a question.
I hope I have an answer.
You'll have an answer. I don't know what it will be. First of all, oh my gosh, shame on me for not celebrating this. This sounds surface value, especially from you presenting that socialized data, if you will, and laws. I mean, this sounds like a massive win for the OG Americans, man. The OG Americans, maybe not the young kids but it's curving socialism. I think that's great. My worry is this: manpower right? If you're going to, first of all, CFPB is incredibly strong. I understand how strong they are. They're very aggressive with interpretation. I think this is, again, a great for America. We're curving that socialism, that Keynesian way of doing things, all great, but who the hell is going to replace them? That's my worry. And my question to you, Melody, is there a potential? Obviously, we know there's a lack of manpower. We know that from the FTC. I don't know if you've ever worked with the FTC. I have. They're freaking unbelievably it's useless. Do we have the manpower to set something up where it's not a potentially more evil situation where someone comes in, learns the loopholes, take advantage of the loopholes, right? We're in need of an agency. We're in need of help. There's not enough judges. There's not enough interpretation. It's good we're removing individual judgment, but will they find a way to just do you see what I'm saying? Is this just going to be
there's always some downstream implication that we can't foresee. There's always somebody that's going to figure out how to, get around the system. But what I love about this is it's bringing everything out from the shadows into transparency where judges will decide. And so, of course, a lot of people argue that the Supreme Court was packed, for certain decisions. And I would say that, the recent CFPB decision on their funding and whether that was constitutional, I believe must have been some horse trading going on to get that one through, knowing that they were pulling the teeth out on the back end of the CFPB in many ways. So yeah, Travis, there is always the opportunity for workaround and like you say, just lack of resources. But they will not be able to move forward until those decisions are made. Whereas they've been moving forward without any care or concern, in my opinion.
I mean, it's good. Again, it's just like, I don't trust a lot of what I've seen recently, especially when we went on a trip and you showed, I won't talk about the September 11th, but this is a good first half, right? It's a good first half, but my worry is like what we've been seeing recently. They go, the first half is great. And then someone else comes along, they pass a new law and it's freaking useless, or they pass a law for the public. So we simmer down and again, where's the solution there? I mean, it's great. The transparency is good. We could talk about it. That's step one, Melody. Step one is great, that transparency, but what's step two? What's step two here? I mean, seriously,
execution.
So there's not enough judicial reviewers. Would you agree with that?
I don't think I can answer that question. I think that's something we'd probably have to look at, but there's not enough of anything right now. And I'd rather if it has to go on a court docket versus being decided in a back room that nobody has access, like a FISA hearing or something like that. I'd much rather at least it has to go on a docket and everybody knows it's there, and it may take some time, but that's the thing. This is curtailing executive powers in a big way, in my opinion. But Jack, you look like you were wanting to say something. Mute.
Oh, I'm just chomping at the bit, Melody.
I could tell.
Let me at him. Look, maybe we don't have enough judicial reviewers, and maybe that's because too much judicial review is required. Maybe that's because our laws suck. And if only we had a whole bicameral governing body whose job it was to make laws. And, I had a tweet from Elizabeth Warren was going viral a few days ago talking about how, oh my God, this decision strips the ability of the expert agencies to make laws to protect us. And I'm like, hey, Senator Karen, isn't making laws kind of your job? Aren't you a United States senator? Isn't that your constitutional mandate to make laws, not the Department of Experts, ABC?
Right.
So, like right now, it's freaking Jerry Springer in Congress. You got Marjorie Taylor Greene fighting with the squad about hair comments. And honestly, I think this comes back to Congress. Congress is going to have to do their freaking job. If unelected bureaucrats can no longer legislate via interpretation because the judges will do their job and rein them in, then Congress needs to step in and make the laws more clear. They need to make specific targeted laws that don't overstep. And to that lady at the Southern Environmental Law Center, if you can't get the law through Congress that you want, it's because half of the country or more disagrees with you. And just because you think you're an expert doesn't mean you get your way. Democracy can be messy. Our constitutional republic can be messy, but we have this separation of powers for a reason. And I think the sector that is going to be most impacted by this is the legislative sector, because maybe, just maybe, this Supreme Court decision forces this circus in Congress to get their stuff together and finally start doing their freaking job. Agreed.
And I think, Jack, it stops this, right? Like the Fed has been, over and over talking about, hey, we can't fix this. Like, Congress has to step in. Like we are going to have different policies, and everybody's just pointing at each other and not acting. But I agree with you. Congress is about making laws, and they have done. The reason why everything's gotten out of control is that they're more interested in, shenanigans, fist fights, wearing ridiculous gowns to, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, whatever. That's all show. It reminds me so much of the Hunger Games, when they go to the Capitol. I mean, honestly, guys, close your eyes, step back, look at our Congress, and then close your eyes again, and then look at those people at the Capitol in the Hunger Games. Especially look at the pictures of them at the Met Ball, for instance. There is no difference. I mean, we are in such it's completely farcical at this point. And so I think that, it's, Travis, I get it, the cynicism, and I also am cynical. All I'm thinking about right now is what am I missing? Because it does feel like a win, which makes me think I need to slow down and figure out the loopholes. But I do think, guys, this is so huge. And everybody, I'm sure you were around for the 2020 election and you heard about the deep state and you heard about this. This is kind of those conspiracy theories. We're talking a lot about these unelected officials. And I'm sorry, Travis, I think Jack's little quote, or that very first, when I asked him what he wanted to say, we gotta tape that. It was absolutely perfect. And I think he's now winning, just so you know. Melonheads are winning.
It was your time to present. I didn't want to do you like that, but he is winning.
Yeah,
slightly.
So. Yeah,
and
yeah,
I'm so far in last. I'm out of the equation completely. I mean,
whatever. What ifs?
Great.
Anyway,
stuff,
no.
buddy.
So again, we don't know how this will work, but I believe it is going to put the pressure on Congress to start doing its job.
Oof, that's a crazy comment right there. I have a question, Melody, for you from the viewers. Now, first of all, you covered a lot. I mean, we could literally talk an hour. No, you better to throw up on the table than leave stuff out, right? Let me see the entire picture here. But my God, it was very powerful. Kind of makes you think are we not paying attention to the laws they're passing? It's a rhetorical question, but here's a question. I think comparing this to the early 80s is incorrect because of those two differences. I'm not 100% sure what two differences he's speaking about. What do you think, Melody?
I think we were talking about inflation. I can't remember. I saw his question come up. But, I think that the 80s, in my opinion, when we're looking back in history and trying to compare it to this time, and it might have been on the recession and deflation question. But, in the 80s, we had a very different demographic picture. We were still, we were moving right along. We were still birthing babies, but also women were joining the workforce. And that was a huge economic force that really propelled us, because they were able to come in and add that second income. And it then fueled that increase in consumption. And so to me, I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly where this question came in, but I think that the 80s are very different from today for precisely that reason.
I like it. This is a polarizing question. I think it should go to probably Jack a little bit as well. But Melody, question for you: if America gets serious about booting out 35 million illegal immigrants, would that free up housing stock? Would that lower rents? Would that lower housing prices? And if so, by what percentage? I think that's what he's asking.
Yeah, I want to take the NYC reference specifically, but Jack, you go ahead if you want to start.
Look, immigration, obviously a charged subject. The policy that we have in place right now, obviously not working. Just letting anyone and everyone into the country blankly and shipping them all over the place is not working. That being said, I've worked with immigrants in the past before. They are some of the most hardworking, gung-ho, just badass people. It was a pleasure to work with them. They produced a lot of value, and then they raised their kids here. And all the studies about the kids of first generation of immigrants end up being very successful. They have an entrepreneurial spirit. They are good for the country. That being said, our current policy doesn't work. So we need comprehensive immigration reform. We need to close the freaking border, and then we need to put a big door in that thing to let people who are good for this country in. All right. And unfortunately, the screamers, I've said this before, the screamers on both sides of this issue dominate the conversation and nothing ever happens. We need both of these things to happen. Just outright rounding up 35 million people, the logistics of that and the consequences of that are going to be unbelievable. It is untenable. The solution is to stop the flow of them in first, and then figure out a way to weed them out, to separate the ones we want to let in, who can come here and be productive and benefit society, and keep the ones who are just going to be a drain out.
Yeah. And so I absolutely agree with you, Jack. This is divisive, but we have to be able to talk about it. And what I want everyone to understand is they're already here. And so, like you say, let's focus on closing the border to get a viable policy in place, creating that door for naturalization. Those naturalizations have had a huge economic impact. Where you see the trajectory, and they started increasing back in 1995, hoping to do a much bigger story. But I want to take the NYC reference because this is one of the things that makes me crazy. So Travis and I were in NYC in New York in January, right, Travis, when we went, and the city is deserted. We were there for 4 days. We walked the entire city. I lived there for 7 years of my life. Guys, the city's deserted. So in New York City, what's happening is they took some of the hotels that weren't being rented, guys. Okay, they had vacancy, and they turned those into shelter for migrants. One of the things that people aren't talking about is a lot of these people that own apartments in New York City, after that 2019 rule that you could not increase rent control units by a certain amount, they are holding them off market. And so it is a fake occupancy rate in New York City. You can walk that city and you absolutely know that they are not experiencing a housing shortage there. Now, maybe those aren't on the market, and because people are mad about that 2019 rule, and the fact that they can't even cover costs if they were to rent them out. And so that's a whole different discussion. But right now, the New York City situation specifically, I think people are trying to use it to create division. And there's more to that story than many are talking about.
We got a comment from Eddie here, and we'll try to wrap this one up here shortly. But Eddie's asking, Melody, actually, that reminds me of a question. Why can we not have a balanced budget? Years ago, there was a balanced budget amendment that did not pass. Is it unreasonable? Comment there, Melody?
Yeah, so I think someone else made a comment in the chat that I think is very important. And they said Congress reflects who we voted in, right? Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Yeah. And so we have to take responsibility for this as well. And the reason there hasn't been a balanced budget is because it hasn't been as important to enough people, And so I think that how does that start? Or how can we start affecting change there? We have to call our Congress members and say, listen, this is important to me, and I don't like the way you've been dealing with this issue, and I need to see traction, or I'm not going to vote for you. It's that simple. And so, we have to take some responsibility here, but I absolutely believe we should be looking at a balanced budget.
Jack, last question for you, and then maybe we can move on to the next. I thought this would be right up your alley, since you're middle class. Question. Spot price for silver is close to $30 per ounce, but Debt Clock has it at $240 plus. Is this a signal things are already collapsing? Any thoughts? Seems weird. I think that's right up your alley, Jack.
So I'm not familiar with that $240 data point. I know there is something about that the Debt Clock does with the price of silver. I can't think of it off the top of my head. Let me just address the spirit of the question, though. I think silver is probably the single most undervalued asset class in the world. Just my opinion here. I love silver. That's where my channel was born, was in the silver squeeze movement. I keep my little American flag, Go America silver bar right here, so I could flash it when I'm live every now and then. Silver at around $30 an ounce is nowhere near an all-time high. Gold is only a few dollars shy of an all-time high right now at 2,400, which was a new all-time high that it set recently. Silver's all-time high was either 1981 or 2011. I forget which one was actually the peak, but it was just under $50 an ounce was the all-time high that silver has reached. So even though silver has had a monster run in 2024 so far, it is nowhere near its all-time high. And therefore, in my opinion, just to catch up with the move gold has already made, silver would have to be valued almost 60, 70% higher than it is right now. So I think silver is just a fantastic asset class. I own a lot of it myself. So I like that. Now, is this somehow a signal that we're somehow nearing the end? I don't know. My gut tells me they're going to do this cycle of cause a recession and then print and lower interest rates to get out of it several more times before it really blows up. It's not very doomer of me to say we could probably do this for 2 or 3 more cycles. But I think precious metals are going to run very strongly when that happens. And that's why I said earlier, it's not just what happens during a recession. It's what do our monetary and fiscal authorities do in response to that you want to be asking yourself. That's why I like metals here.
Melody, anything else?
I'll just say that Christmas, not this past year, but the year before, I bought all of my family silver and seeds, and I am proud to see those returns. I feel like I proved my macro metal with my family. So,
and I'll answer this just last one, just because it was addressed to me, and then we'll wrap this one up. Travis, have you been dipping into precious metals and hanging out to T-bills? The thing is yeah, actually I had gold and I had T-bills, but life has been hitting me like a freaking bulldozer. I'm spending all my money like Melody traveling around the nation. And honestly, guys, I had to sell my gold. I hate it. I had no choice. I have a whole bunch of lifetime events. The last time you guys saw me, so much has happened. I went to go do a documentary on great hammerheads, catching them from land. When I was on the trip, found out that my house is a mold house. My whole family got sick. I had to rush out. I put an offer on a house, did a full comb of my market, try to be an owner, just wasn't willing to settle. Did the moved in. This is a whole new studio, set it up, and I had a medical procedure, pre-cancer removed from my intestines last week. So no, man, I don't have precious metals. If I had excess money, yeah, I would. And then it was a $3,000 bill just to take my 6-year-old to the ER. So, dude, so we got to decide, do we want to take the hit on our credit, right? Geez, $3,000 is a lot, especially when you just move. So, Eddie, I think those are safe investments. I've had both of them, but brother, the inflation's hurting me. I'm not middle class like Jack is. All right, guys, that is sorry. Moving on.